Michael Lawrence opened his eyes a split second before the night guard slammed his baton against the cold metal bars. 4,897 dawns in a death row cell had taught him to sense the morning rounds with every fiber of his being. "Up, Lawrence. Today's your final day," croaked Officer Benson, his bulky frame blocking the thin beam of corridor light. 12 hours left until he'd meet the needle. Michael slowly sat up on his narrow bunk, his fingers gripping the edge of the thin mattress. 42 years old. 13 of them behind these walls, on death row at San Quentin. Now, just 12 hours of life remained. "As always, Benson," Michael said evenly, forcing his voice to sound calm, though deep inside he felt the countdown ticking louder than ever. The cell block stirred awake. The grind of metal doors. Low murmurs of inmates. The shuffle of boots on the concrete floor. Michael knew every sound, every scent. The stale dampness of ancient walls mixed with sharp antiseptic. The metallic tang of tap water. The rancid odor of the food he'd soon receive. He stepped to the small sink, splashing cold water on his face. No mirror. Just a polished scrap of metal reflecting a blurry version of himself. Dark rings under his eyes. Gray invading his temples. Deep lines cutting through skin once smooth. 13 years of waiting to die had aged him faster than nature alone ever could. His fingertips brushed the scar on his left palm. A flood of memory. A dark alley. A man's scream. A flash of a knife. Blood soaking asphalt. He hadn't killed that man. But 12 jurors had decided otherwise. "Breakfast, Lawrence." The tray slid through the slot in the door. Oatmeal, bland as ever. A stale slice of bread. An apple, surprisingly fresh. A small mercy for a man soon to die. Michael ate slowly, tasting every mouthful. When your hours are numbered, even prison oatmeal feels profound. After breakfast, 5 minutes under a thin stream of lukewarm water in the shower. Then an hour in the yard, a concrete box beneath the open sky. A glimpse of the sun. A breath of air that didn't taste of concrete and iron. He lifted his face to the sun, memorizing the warmth. "Nice day for the last one, huh, Lawrence?" Rodriguez, an inmate in the next cell, pressed against the chain-link fence, grinning. "Any day's a good day while you're still breathing," Michael replied without lowering his eyes from the sky. Back in his cell, he sat on his bunk and pulled a worn photo from under the mattress. A woman with a kind smile. A little girl with the same green eyes as his own. Lisa and Emma. His wife had stopped visiting years ago. Moved on. Married someone else. His daughter, 18 now, hadn't seen him in a decade. Michael traced a finger along his daughter's image. To die without seeing what kind of woman she'd become. That, more than the needle, was the real sentence. Suddenly, hurried footsteps. Not the steady march of guards. Faster. Nervous. A young guard, Carter, peeked into his cell, eyes darting up and down the corridor. "You got a visitor, Lawrence." 5 minutes. Visiting room. Michael raised an eyebrow. He wasn't expecting anyone. In the past few years, only his lawyer had visited, always failing to find a way to reopen the case. Inside the cramped visiting room waited Frank Donovan, his attorney. The old man looked more worn than ever, his suit rumpled, worry deep in his eyes. "Michael," Donovan cast a quick glance at the door. "I found him. Someone who saw what really happened that night. He's willing to testify. His statement proves you didn't do it." Michael's heartbeat vanished, like someone had cut the cord of life. "Why the hell did he keep silent all these years?" he whispered, disbelief tightening around his ribs. He was threatened. The real killer kept him terrified. But now he's dying. Wants to clear his soul before he goes. Donovan's hands trembled as he laid out the impossible truth. "I filed an emergency motion to halt the execution, but Judge McCormick is on vacation, and his deputy." Donovan faltered. His eyes clouded with despair. The deputy denied it. Michael finished for him, reading the defeat in the old man's face. Donovan nodded miserably. We're appealing, but it'll take days. And by then, Michael would be dead. Inside him, silent fury rose like fire licking dry wood. 13 years in hell for a crime he didn't commit. Now, when the truth was ready to surface, time was bleeding away. Donovan leaned closer, voice dropping to a desperate whisper. There's more. Your daughter, Emma. She's trying to reach you. She believes you. She wants to see you before. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Emma, his baby girl, now grown, wanting to see him. The thought cracked his heart wide open. Die without clearing his name? Without holding his daughter's gaze one last time? Impossible. Unacceptable. When the guard marched him back to his cell, Michael Lawrence, prisoner 247891, sentenced to die, made up his mind. If the system wouldn't grant him justice, he'd seize it with his own hands. 12 hours left. 12 hours to do the impossible. The metallic clang of the guard's baton against the iron bars jolted Michael Lawrence back into the grim present. For a moment, as he blinked the sleep from his eyes, he almost thought he'd woken up in his old bed, beside his wife, with the soft sounds of his daughter's cartoons drifting from the living room. But reality settled like a cold stone in his chest, a concrete cell, peeling paint, and the stale scent of disinfectant mixed with human despair. Get up, Lawrence! Today's the big day. Benson's voice was a crow's rasp, harsh and bored at once. His massive figure blocked the flickering hallway light. Michael sat up slowly on the thin mattress. His calloused hands gripped its edges as if they could stop time from ripping him forward. 13 years. 4,897 sunrises behind these bars. And now only 12 hours left until the needle would slide into his vein and carry him into silence. He rose, joints cracking in protest. He padded to the tiny rust-stained sink. There was no mirror, only a piece of polished steel that warped his reflection. Dark hollows under eyes. Gray dusting his temples. Wrinkles cutting through what once was a young man's easy smile. He touched the thin scar across his left palm, a memento from the night that devoured his life. An alleyway. A fight that wasn't his. A knife he never wielded. Blood that wasn't meant to be shed. 12 jurors decided otherwise. A tray rattled through the food slot. Breakfast, Lawrence! Benson barked, already turning away. Porridge. Dry bread. A bruised apple, a small mercy for a man marked to die. Michael chewed slowly, tasting every bland mouthful as if it were a gourmet's final course. When your time is counted by the second, even prison oatmeal seems precious. 5 minutes in the communal shower. The water lukewarm, barely a trickle. He let it wash over him, cleansing nothing but the sweat of another restless night. Then an hour in the yard, a square of cracked concrete hemmed by towering walls and razor wire. He lifted his face to the rising sun. The warmth kissed the lines on his skin. Good day for your last, huh, Lawrence? Rodriguez, the inmate in the next cell block, leaned against the fence, grinning without humor. Every day is good when you can breathe, Rodriguez. Michael called back, never lowering his eyes from the sky. Back in his cell, he fished out the only photograph that had survived the years, hidden under his mattress, edges worn soft by time and fingers. His wife, Lisa, the woman who stopped visiting long ago. His daughter, Emma, 5 years old, bright green eyes just like his. She'd be 18 now. A woman he had missed becoming. A life he'd missed living. Worst part of dying was not seeing who she'd become. A sudden shuffle of hurried footsteps outside his cell door snapped him back to the present. The young guard, Carter, appeared, face pale, eyes darting nervously. You got a visitor. 5 minutes, Lawrence. Don't make trouble. Michael raised an eyebrow. He hadn't had a visitor in years, except his lawyer, who'd done little more than deliver empty promises. But in the visiting room sat Frank Donovan, older, grayer, suit more wrinkled than last time. Frank didn't waste time. "Michael, listen to me. I found someone. A witness who was there that night. He says you didn't do it. He wants to clear your name before he dies." Michael's breath caught like barbed wire in his throat. "And where's this angel been hiding for 13 years? He rasped. He was terrified. The real killer threatened him. He's terminal now, Michael. He wants his conscience clean." Frank's eyes glistened with desperate hope. "I filed an emergency motion to stop the execution, but the judge is on vacation. His substitute denied it. We filed an appeal, but it'll take days. Days I don't have." Michael finished, voice low, fury boiling behind his ribs. Donovan leaned in, whispering urgently, "One more thing. Your daughter, Emma. She reached out. She wants to see you before it's too late. She believes you, Michael." Emma. His little girl. His knees nearly gave out at the sound of her name. To die without clearing his name was bad enough. To die without seeing her, unforgivable. As Carter escorted him back to his cell, Michael's mind was no longer the mind of a resigned man. It was the mind of a man with 12 hours to do the impossible. Michael sat on the edge of his narrow bunk, pressing his fingertips into the thin mattress. The echo of the guard's baton hitting the bars still rang in his ears. 12 hours left before the needle. He let out a slow breath, pushed himself up, and shuffled to the small sink bolted to the wall. There was no mirror, just a scratched scrap of metal polished enough to catch the ghost of his reflection. Deep lines, gray at the temples, hollow eyes. Cold water splashed on his face. It couldn't wash away the alley, the screaming, the flash of a blade. He hadn't killed that boy. But 12 jurors had said otherwise. Metal rattled at the door slot. "Breakfast, Lawrence," the guard barked, pushing a tray through the slit. Michael carried it back to his bunk. Watery oatmeal. A piece of stale bread. And today, a fresh apple. A final courtesy for a dead man walking. He ate slowly, tasting every bland bite like it was his last meal in the world. When death is waiting outside your door, even prison oatmeal tastes like a blessing. Afterward, a 5-minute shower under a barely warm trickle. Then the yard, a concrete pen under an open sky. He lifted his face to the sun and closed his eyes. 13 years since he'd felt sunlight without bars overhead. A familiar voice broke the quiet. "Good day for a last walk, huh, Lawrence?" Rodriguez, another dead man walking, leaned on the fence, grin crooked and teeth ground down by time. Michael didn't open his eyes. "Every day's good if you're breathing, Rod." Rodriguez laughed under his breath. No guard stopped them. What trouble could a man cause on his last day alive? Back in his cell, Michael sat cross-legged on the bunk and slid a worn photo from under the mattress. A woman's gentle smile. A little girl with his same green eyes. Lisa and Emma. His wife hadn't visited in years, remarried. But his daughter, 18 now. The last time he'd held her, she'd clung to his leg, begging him not to go. He'd never seen the woman she'd become. He traced Emma's face with his thumb, and a sharp ache filled his chest, worse than the thought of the needle. Suddenly, footsteps outside. Different this time. Not Benson's heavy boots. A lighter, faster step. The hatch opened. Young guard Carter, eyes darting. "You got a visitor, Lawrence." 5 minutes. Room 3. Michael frowned. "Who?" Nobody came except Donovan, the lawyer who lost every appeal but never left him alone. Moments later, Michael sat behind glass, phone pressed to his ear. Frank Donovan slumped on the other side, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Frank?" Michael rasped. "Michael, listen to me. I found him. A witness. He was there that night. He saw everything. He's dying, and he wants to confess. Michael's heart slammed against his ribs. Why now? Why not before? He was threatened. He ran. But now? He's got nothing to lose. Donovan rubbed his temples. I filed for an emergency stay. But Judge McCormick is gone, and his stand-in denied it. The words landed like stones inside Michael's chest. 13 years. 13 years of waiting, and now time was draining away faster than hope could keep up. Donovan's voice cracked. We're appealing again. But it'll take days. By then, Michael finished the sentence inside his head. By then, he'd be ashes. Donovan leaned closer, lowering his voice. One more thing, Michael. Your daughter, Emma. She's here. She wants to see you. Michael felt his throat close up. Emma. His little girl, a grown woman now, brave enough to come stand by him when the world still called him a killer. I can't die without seeing her, Frank. I can't. Donovan nodded, eyes bright with tears. I know. I'll do everything I can. Back in his cell, Michael paced like a cornered wolf. 12 hours left. A corrupt verdict. A system that wouldn't listen. If the law wouldn't save him, he'd have to break it. Michael sat frozen in the cold plastic chair of the visitation room. Frank Donovan's words echoed in his mind like a hammer striking an old bell. A witness. Someone who saw everything that night. Someone who could clear his name. But 12 hours left. 12 hours until the needle would end it all. He clenched his fists under the table, trying to keep his breathing calm. Donovan leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. We filed an emergency motion. But the judge is on vacation and his replacement denied it outright. We're appealing, but it won't happen in time. I'm sorry, Michael. God knows I tried. Michael's vision blurred for a moment. He wasn't sure if it was from rage or the suffocating despair that suddenly gripped his throat. 13 years on death row. 13 years buried alive for a crime he didn't commit. And now the truth surfaced only to be choked by bureaucracy. He thought of Emma. Her tiny hand in his. Her laughter echoing in his memory. He would never see the woman she'd become. Never tell her he was innocent. Never hold her again. His heart pounded so hard he thought Donovan might hear it. He leaned forward. His voice calm, but each word slicing through the stale air. I won't die for something I didn't do, Frank. If the system won't save me, I'll save myself. Donovan's eyes widened. Michael, don't. You'll only make it worse. You'll never get out alive. They'll hunt you like a dog. Michael managed a small, bitter smile. They already do. The guard's keys jingled as he unlocked the heavy door behind them. Time was running out. Donovan whispered hurriedly. I'll keep fighting. I promise. If you find a way out, find Emma. Tell her everything. I'll help any way I can. Michael nodded. Then he rose. Chains rattled around his wrists as the guard grunted. Time's up, Lawrence. Back to your cage. Walking back down the sterile hallway, Michael replayed every layout. Every guard's routine. Every blind corner. Tonight, everything would change. He still had hope. But this time, it was armed with desperation. Back in his tiny cell, Michael sat motionless on the edge of his cot. The gray walls seemed to lean closer than ever, pressing him down, crushing him under their silent judgment. He rubbed the scar on his left palm, a habit he'd picked up in the early years when fear ate him alive every night. Tonight fear had no place. Only resolve. He reached under the thin mattress, fingers searching until they touched the edges of his last hidden treasure. A photograph. Liza and Emma. Frozen in time with bright summer smiles. A life stolen by a single dark alley and 12 jurors who never looked past his record. His throat tightened. Tears burned behind his eyes. But he forced them back. He had no right to break now. Not when he had decided to fight. Footsteps echoed down the block. Keys. Voices. Dinner slid through the slot in the door. Cold oatmeal. A piece of bread. A single bruised apple, special for a dead man. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a ritual. He washed his hands in the rusted sink and studied his reflection in the polished steel he used for a mirror. Deep lines around the eyes. Gray at the temples. A man the world had long ago buried behind concrete and iron. He heard Rodriguez's low voice from the next cell. "Hey, Lawrence. It's a good sunset out there. Maybe your last. You should enjoy it, man." Michael leaned back on his cot. His mind worked through every hallway, every shift change, every broken camera. He traced each step in his head. Again, and again, and again. 12 hours left. Each second an enemy. Each heartbeat a countdown. He pressed the photo to his chest. Then hid it again. When they came for him, he would be ready. Hours crawled by inside that concrete tomb. Michael sat cross-legged on his cot. Eyes open. Mind sharper than it had ever been in 13 years of staring at death. At exactly 6 p.m., the heavy lock clanked. The slot rattled open. A meal tray slid in with more than usual, a farewell dinner for the condemned. Chicken. Mashed potatoes. A slice of pie that tasted of old freezers and cheap sugar. Luxury for the soon-to-be dead. He forced it down bite by bite. Each chew a reminder. This was fuel. Not a last supper. Afterwards. A knock at the door. A priest's voice soft through the bars. "Michael. May I come in?" Father Thomas. The only man in that place who looked at him and saw something other than a number and a death warrant. Michael nodded. The bars swung open. Father Thomas stepped inside. Eyes full of gentle pity that Michael both hated and needed. "My son. Are you ready to make peace with God tonight?" Michael looked at the old man's lined face. His trembling hands clutching a worn Bible. He almost laughed. "Peace? I'm ready to make peace with the truth. Father. I didn't do what they said I did. And tonight, I'm going to prove it. One way or another." The priest sighed deeply. He touched Michael's shoulder. "God sees what men overlook. Whatever you choose to do, may He watch over you." Then, as if heaven itself was in on the plan, Father Thomas reached into his robe, pulled out a simple pen and a scrap of paper. "Write to your daughter. If you wish. I'll see that she gets it." Michael's hands shook as he took them. He scribbled a short message. No tears. No apologies. Just love and truth. Then tucked the pen into his sleeve when Father Thomas wasn't looking. Minutes later, the old man blessed him one last time and vanished down the corridor. Michael pressed his forehead to the cold wall, clutched the stolen pen barrel hidden up his sleeve. He whispered one promise into the silence. "Hold on, Emma. Daddy's coming for the truth. And for you." Night settled like a suffocating blanket over San Quentin. The cell block grew quiet, that peculiar death row quiet, where every man lay awake counting heartbeats he wished would never stop or never start again. Michael sat in the dark, hunched over the pen parts hidden in his palm. He worked by memory, hands trembling just once when a distant door slammed. The pen barrel, the spring, the tiny metal clip, worthless alone but together, a simple lockpick. He tested it on the cuff of his wrist chain. Just the feel of the mechanism under his fingertips made his pulse quicken. One chance. One shot. At 11 p.m., a guard's boots clumped past. Benson's voice barked at someone down the tier. Routine threats, routine obedience. Michael waited. Breathed. Waited more. When silence returned, he tucked the makeshift pick into his waistband and lay back, arms crossed behind his head, staring up at cracked concrete. He pictured the hallway to the transfer block. The broken cameras. The guard rotations. Benson's habit, always pausing for a smoke break in the same blind spot, even on execution nights. In his mind, he rehearsed the path again. 5 doors. 3 corners. One old delivery tunnel that hadn't seen daylight in 20 years. A sound. Footsteps again, 2 sets this time. Closer. Keys jangled. Metal scraped. Lawrence, Benson's voice sneered through the bars. Rise and shine, hero. Time to take you for your final walk. Michael rose slowly, every muscle coiled but calm. He turned, hands ready. The door swung open. The cuffs snapped tight around his wrists. Too tight. Good. He needed them to think he was harmless. 2 guards flanked him. One young and jittery, Carter, new to death row. The other, Benson, hard and mean and just predictable enough to gamble everything on. They marched him down the row. Metal doors slammed behind them like a drumbeat to the gallows. Michael didn't flinch. He tasted the steel in the air. Freedom or death, no middle ground now. As they reached the shadowed hallway near the old service tunnel, Benson stopped for his ritual cigarette. He turned his back, flicking the lighter with a click that echoed like a promise. Michael exhaled. Flexed his wrist just enough to feel the hidden pick against his skin. Showtime. Michael moved exactly when the chance cracked open, like a fault line under his feet. Benson's cigarette ember glowed red in the dark corridor. Carter stood ahead, shoulders stiff, one hand on his stun gun, the other brushing sweat off his temple. Michael shifted his weight, slow enough not to trigger alarm. His fingers curled, slipping the tiny pick from inside his sleeve into his palm. One breath. Another. He whispered calm and low. Benson. The older guard grunted, annoyed to be disturbed during his ritual smoke. What? Do you ever think? Michael said, voice steady despite the hurricane in his chest. How many men died in here, still innocent? Benson scoffed, dragging deep on his cigarette. Smoke wreathed his face like some cheap ghost. Every man says he's innocent. Hell, you've been saying it for 13 years. Walk. Michael didn't move. He tilted his wrists back just slightly, feeling the pick catch the first notch inside the cuff. Carter glanced back, suspicion flickering. Hey, keep moving, Lawrence. Too late. A click. A hiss of metal opening. Michael swung his now free right arm hard into Carter's jaw. The young guard stumbled, dropping the stun gun, eyes wide in shock. Benson spun, cursing, hand reaching for his baton. Michael lunged. They collided shoulder to chest, a grunt, a crunch of bone on stone wall. The cigarette dropped, sparks scattering like tiny fireworks. A heartbeat of frozen silence. Then Michael drove his elbow into Benson's ribs, felt the older man's breath leave him in a harsh wheeze. Another blow, a knee this time, dropped him to the floor. Carter groaned, half-conscious, fumbling for the radio clip to his vest. Michael snatched it first, ripping it free, tossing it down the dark corridor. He forced himself to breathe. Ahead, the maintenance door to the old tunnel gate open, left ajar for workers months ago, never locked again. Michael yanked the cuff off his other wrist, grabbed Benson's key ring and security badge. He spared one glance at the 2 guards, both alive. That mattered. Then he turned and ran. Bare hands. Barely a plan. But for the first time in 13 years, no chains on his wrists. Michael's shoes pounded against the cold concrete. His breath came in ragged bursts as he tore down the maintenance corridor. Old pipes rattled overhead, some dripping rust-tainted water onto his shoulders. He clutched Benson's keycard so tightly it dug into his palm, a piece of plastic now worth more than gold. Around him, the prison walls felt alive. Alarms had not yet screamed, but he knew they would. Maybe Benson would wake in 3 minutes, maybe Carter would crawl to the radio, but it didn't matter. He had to move faster than fear. He ducked into the utility chamber, a dark box lined with old mop buckets and electrical panels. There, behind a loose grate he'd memorized years ago, was the crawlspace. Narrow, filthy, but just wide enough for a desperate man to squeeze through. He shoved his shoulders inside. Metal scraped skin. He felt the walls bruise his ribs. Every heartbeat was a drumroll. He dragged himself with elbows and knees until the crawlspace widened, just enough to kneel. Beneath him, the floor vibrated. Somewhere below, an old service tunnel ran out to the delivery yard, a leftover from a time when San Quentin needed coal and fresh produce brought in daily. Officially sealed decades ago. In reality? No one bothered. Michael found the hatch, corroded but not locked. He jammed Benson's keys into the padlock, praying the old man hadn't changed them. Click. It swung loose. He dropped down into darkness. Down here, the smell was mold and rat droppings. The air tasted like wet concrete. But this was freedom's taste too. He turned on the tiny pen light he'd stolen from Carter's pocket and traced the ancient maintenance track, old rails still embedded in the ground. He ran. Above him, the muffled echo of sirens finally started to wail. Too late, too late. He forced himself to think like the version of himself before the prison, young, reckless, able to vanish when he needed to. The tunnel bent left, then right. Ahead, a faint breeze, fresh night air leaking through broken bricks where the wall met the yard's retaining fence. Michael pressed an ear to it. He heard the distant hiss of the bay, salt and cold wind threading through stone. With shaking hands, he widened the crack. One brick fell with a dull thud. He peered out, 30 yards away, laundry trucks lined up under a single weak lamp. One guard leaned against a post, bored, smoking. Michael braced. His muscles felt carved from stone and fire. He waited. The guard turned away to light another cigarette. For 1 second, a shadow turned his back to Michael's crack in the wall. Michael pushed through the gap, boots crunching gravel. He ran low and silent between crates, ducked behind a battered laundry van. His heart thumped so loudly it threatened to betray him. He crawled to the cab door. Locked. He slid around to the back, a canvas flap, half-tied. He ripped it up and climbed into the truck's cargo bed, burying himself under grimy bags of inmate uniforms. He forced his breath slow, shallow. Outside, the bored guard finished his cigarette. Moments later, the truck's door slammed. An engine growled to life. The whole truck lurched forward. Michael lay hidden in the stench of sweat-soaked cotton, clutching the stolen keycard to his chest. Each bump on the road jolted his bruised ribs, but he didn't care. The prison fence was behind him now, steel and concrete shrinking with every mile. Ahead was only the unknown, and the impossible promise that maybe, just maybe, tonight he'd outrun death. Michael exhaled softly as the truck vanished behind the bend. He knew that every passing second tightened the dragnet closing in around him. The highways were crawling with patrols, checkpoints were being set up on every exit and entrance. He moved quietly through the trees, avoiding open areas illuminated by the dull glow of roadside lamps and the occasional roar of passing cars. Twigs cracked beneath his boots, but the dense night cover gave him more protection than the city's alleys ever could. Reaching the edge of a quiet rural road, he paused under the cover of shadows. He needed wheels. His legs alone wouldn't carry him fast enough to outpace the radio chatter and roadblocks closing in. Headlights flickered ahead, growing larger, an old pickup, crawling along at a patient, country pace. Michael stepped forward, lifting his hand, trying to look weary but harmless, like any stranded traveler needing help at this hour. The truck slowed to a stop beside him. Behind the wheel sat an elderly man with a weathered face and hands rough from decades of honest work. "Where you headed, son?" the old man called through the open window, squinting at him under the dome light. "Toward Richmond? Just need a lift as far as you can go." Michael kept his voice steady, his eyes downcast, a man with troubles, but not the kind that made folks call the cops. The old farmer glanced him up and down, then jerked his chin toward the passenger seat. "Hop in. Can't have you catching your death out here." Michael murmured a grateful, "Thank you, sir," and climbed in, careful to keep his hands visible. Inside the cab, the heater wheezed a soft warmth. A country station crackled on low volume from a battered radio. For a moment, Michael let the fatigue roll over him, the adrenaline draining just enough for the ache in his bones to settle in. The farmer drove one-handed, the other tapping the wheel in rhythm with the old tune playing. "Name's Earl," he said after a mile or so. "Yours?" "Richard," Michael answered, using the alias stitched onto the fake ID in his pocket. "Just trying to get home. Been a long time away." Earl nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, mist curling off the fields in the glow of the headlights. "Ain't it always the way? World gets smaller, trouble gets bigger." Michael watched the darkness slip past outside the window. He wondered how many more backroads he'd have to cross before the past caught up to him again, or if he could outrun it long enough to clear his name for good. For tonight, though, he was just a weary traveler riding through the quiet American countryside, the world believing him a monster while a kind stranger gave him one more mile toward freedom. Michael stepped out of the battered pickup truck just outside the city limits of San Francisco. The old farmer, who had given him a ride without asking too many questions, wished him luck before driving away into the night. The cool coastal wind hit Michael's face, bringing with it the salty scent of the ocean and the hum of a city that never really slept. He pulled the brim of his borrowed baseball cap lower over his eyes, adjusted the cheap sunglasses he still wore despite the hour, and merged with the flow of people moving along the sidewalk. He knew he needed to reach Pier 39 before dawn. That was where Emma would be. He repeated her name to himself like a prayer, a fragile lifeline pulling him through these final miles. His mind raced as he walked. He replayed every word from Donovan's last message. "She's waiting. She wants to see you one last time, before anything else happens." A wave of anxiety almost made him turn back. What if she hated him for everything, for vanishing when she was 5, for reappearing now as a fugitive hunted by every cop in the state? What father shows up on the front page in handcuffs and shackles? He stopped at a bus stop bench under a flickering street lamp. He sat, catching his breath, scanning the dark street for patrol cars. Everything looked normal: late-night cabs, a drunk couple arguing, the distant wail of sirens that had nothing to do with him, at least not yet. Michael ran a hand over his jaw. He hadn't properly shaved in days. He felt like a ghost stumbling through the ruins of a life that should have been his, raising Emma, driving her to school, watching her grow up. He forced himself up, back on his feet, driven by that single, gnawing need, to see her, to look into her eyes and tell her what no court ever cared to hear, that he did not kill that man, that he was not a monster. As he neared Fisherman's Wharf, the air grew colder and damp. The clatter of delivery trucks and early morning seagulls mixed with the distant echo of laughter from the bars that never closed. At the corner, a street vendor set up a coffee stand. Michael dug into his pocket and found a crumpled $5 bill, a small luxury he could afford, at least tonight. "One coffee." "Black," he murmured to the vendor, keeping his head low. The steaming cup burned his fingers but grounded him in the moment. He took a sip, savoring the bitterness that reminded him he was still alive, still fighting. He crossed the street and finally saw the wooden arches of Pier 39 ahead, lit by neon signs and scattered strings of lights that swayed gently in the breeze. Somewhere out there, Emma waited. His legs suddenly felt heavy. Every step now carried the weight of 13 years behind bars, countless sleepless nights, and a single shot at redemption. Michael paused near the entrance. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and muttered under his breath, "One step at a time. She deserves the truth. No more lies." Then he walked onto the pier, disappearing into the soft glow of the pre-dawn lights, toward the daughter who was his last chance to feel like a father again. Emma sat at a small outdoor cafe on the pier, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup of chamomile tea she hadn't really touched. Her knee bounced under the table, and every time the door behind her opened, she flinched slightly, lifting her eyes only to see another tourist, or an early morning fisherman passing through. She tried to steady her breath, but her heart refused to calm down. She had rehearsed this conversation so many times in her mind. She had even dreamed about it as a child, her father appearing from nowhere, sweeping her up in his arms, apologizing for everything, and promising never to leave again. But reality was always crueler than dreams. When she finally saw him, an older man, gaunt but walking with a careful purpose, a baseball cap pulled low, she almost didn't recognize him at first. It wasn't until he hesitated at the edge of the patio, scanning the tables like a lost child, that she knew. "Dad," she whispered before she could stop herself. Michael's head jerked up at the sound of her voice. For a heartbeat, either of them moved. Then he crossed the distance between them in just a few strides. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he stood awkwardly, as if asking for permission with his eyes. "Can I?" His voice cracked, older and rougher than she had imagined. Emma nodded, pushing out the empty chair with her foot. When he sat down, they were so close that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the tiny tremors in his hand as he placed it on the table between them. Neither spoke first. The ocean breeze filled the silence between them, carrying the smell of brine and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Finally, Michael found his voice. "You've grown so much," he said, the words breaking halfway. "You look so much like your mother." Emma forced a sad smile. "You look older," she teased gently, but her eyes shimmered with tears she didn't want to shed. Michael let out a quiet, breathless laugh, his first real laugh in years, then swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Em. For everything. For not being there. For the lies. For not fighting harder back then. I should have." She stopped him with a small shake of her head. "Don't. I read everything. Mr. Donovan sent me the files, the new statement. I know about the witness. I know you didn't do it." Hearing her say it, out loud, made his vision blur for a moment. He pressed his lips together, fighting for composure. "I wanted you to know from me," he said. "Before the world turns this into another headline. You deserve that much." She reached across the table, covering his trembling hand with hers. "I just wanted my dad back," she whispered. "Even for one morning." Michael squeezed her hand as if he could anchor himself to this moment forever. For the first time since the night that ruined his life, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a father. But deep down, he knew the clock was ticking. Somewhere behind them, police scanners still hissed with his name. Somewhere on rooftops and street corners, officers were watching for a desperate man. Yet here, in this fleeting bubble of dawn and salty wind, none of that mattered. For now, there was only Emma, her small hand in his, and the fragile truth they clung to like a lifeline in a storm. Michael's heartbeat quickened as he slipped through the side alley behind the cafe. The echo of police radios and hurried footsteps grew fainter behind him, drowned out by the distant sound of gulls and the slap of waves against the pier. He kept moving, weaving through side streets and bustling crowds, head down, baseball cap pulled low. He ducked into a narrow service corridor behind a row of souvenir shops. There he paused, pressing his back against the cold brick wall, chest heaving. He could still feel the warmth of Emma's hand in his. That brief touch gave him more strength than any plan or weapon ever could. He forced himself to focus. He knew the city too well to get cornered now. Michael slipped through the service exit into a back parking lot. A delivery truck idled near the loading dock. Its driver stood by the open cargo door, smoking. Michael approached with careful calm, clearing his throat. Hey man, you heading out? The driver, a young man with earbuds in, barely glanced at him. Yeah. Why? Boss asked me to double-check the last shipment. Mind if I hop in back? The driver shrugged, distracted by his phone. Whatever. Just close the door. Inside the dim truck, surrounded by crates of seafood packed in ice, Michael crouched low. He heard the cargo door slam shut. A minute later, the engine rumbled to life. As the truck pulled away from the pier, Michael allowed himself one shaky exhale. He didn't know where this ride would end, but each mile put more distance between him and the net tightening around the waterfront. This wasn't freedom yet, but it was a fighting chance. Hidden in the back of the fish delivery truck, he could feel every bump on the road rattle through his bones. The cold from the ice seeped into his clothes, but he didn't dare shift his weight too much. The young driver up front had no idea he was carrying a fugitive inches from thousands of dollars worth of frozen fish. Every now and then, the man peered through the cracked door, watching the city blur past, freedom, just beyond the metal walls that smelled of brine and fear. He knew the checkpoint was coming up soon. He had to time it right or risk everything. His pulse drummed against his ribs like a warning. If they got pulled over, there would be nowhere to hide. The truck slowed as it approached the checkpoint outside the city limits. Michael could hear the muffled voices of officers greeting the driver, asking about cargo. He pressed himself deeper into the crates of frozen fish, the icy sting making his teeth chatter. Just a routine delivery to Sacramento, the driver said, trying to sound casual. A flashlight beam cut through a gap in the crates, sweeping too close to Michael's face. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying his breath wouldn't fog in the cold air. The guard seemed to linger forever, then the beam moved away. All right, you're clear. Drive safe. The truck lurched forward again. Michael let out a silent breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He was past the perimeter, one more barrier crossed. But now he needed a place to disappear. Sacramento was still crawling with police alerts about him. He clutched the burner phone in his pocket, weighing his next move. He couldn't run forever. But he had to stay free long enough to finish what he started, to clear his name and see his daughter one more time, without bars and guards and steel doors between them. When the truck finally stopped behind a small seafood market on the outskirts of Sacramento, Michael waited until he heard the driver's footsteps fade inside. Then he pushed the crates aside, forcing himself not to shiver too violently as he climbed out into the night air. The alley was empty, lit only by a flickering security light above the back door. He moved fast, slipping between dumpsters and fences until he reached a side street. His breath curled in the cold darkness as he checked for patrol cars. None yet. He ducked into a bus station restroom, stripped off his soaked prison pants, and changed into a pair of worn jeans and a hoodie he'd stashed under the fish crates. The disguise wasn't perfect, but no one would look twice at a tired man waiting for a bus. Michael caught his reflection in the grimy mirror. The face staring back looked older than he remembered, haunted, gaunt, but alive. He splashed water on his skin, wiped the sweat and fear away, and forced himself to breathe. He still had the address Sarah had given him. An old contact in Oakland, someone who owed her a favor. If he could reach there tonight, he'd have shelter, a phone, maybe even papers to vanish for good. But deep down he knew he didn't want to vanish. Not yet. Not until the truth was louder than the lie that stole 13 years of his life. Michael took the last bus heading toward Oakland, sitting in the very back, his hood pulled low, hands shoved deep into his pockets to hide the trembling. Around him, tired workers and students dozed or stared blankly at their phones. Nobody looked at him twice. That was good. He needed to be invisible just a little longer. When the bus dropped him at a deserted street corner near the industrial docks, he followed Sarah's directions to a rundown warehouse tucked behind stacks of shipping containers. He knocked 3 times, exactly like she told him. The door opened a crack. A narrow-eyed man peeked out, then swung the door wide when he recognized the face Sarah had described. "Name's Luis," the man muttered. "You're the one causing all this noise, huh? Get in before someone sees." Inside, the warehouse was cold but dry. A battered couch sat under a single bare bulb. A heater hissed near a stack of blankets and clothes. Luis handed Michael a phone. "Sarah said you need to make a call. I don't want to know anything else. Use it, then destroy it." Michael dialed Donovan's number from memory. The lawyer answered immediately, voice tight with relief. "Jesus, Michael, are you safe?" "For now," Michael said. He paced the concrete floor, feeling the warmth seep back into his bones. "Did Sarah get the article published?" "It's everywhere. Front pages, primetime news. The public is tearing the DA's office apart for ignoring Ramirez's statement. There's an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. State prosecutors have no choice but to admit the evidence was buried. They'll vacate the sentence, Michael. You're going to walk free." Michael's knees nearly buckled. He pressed a hand to the cold wall, eyes squeezed shut against the rush of emotion. Freedom. Not stolen this time. Earned. "And my daughter?" he rasped. Donovan's voice softened. "She's safe. And she wants to see you. She said she'll be at the courthouse tomorrow. So will Sarah. So will I." Michael laughed, a raw, shaky sound that cracked years of silence. "Then tomorrow, I stop running." He destroyed the phone, tossed the pieces into a barrel fire Luis kept burning for warmth, and lay on the old couch. Sleep came in fits, broken by every creak of the steel walls, every echo of a distant car. But this time, he didn't wake in a cell. Morning brought a gray drizzle. Luis dropped him off 3 blocks from the courthouse. Michael walked the last stretch alone, head down under a borrowed cap, passing reporters who had no idea the man they sought was brushing past them in the rain. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with camera flashes and hushed arguments. Michael slipped through the side entrance Donovan had arranged. When he stepped into the hearing chamber, a gasp rippled through the room. Emma was there, his daughter, no longer a child, eyes red but shining with hope. She stood when she saw him, hands clutched to her chest. He nodded once, promising her everything would be different now. The judge read the ruling in a flat, steady voice. Evidence suppressed. Witness testimony credible. Charges vacated. The death sentence gone. The record expunged. Michael heard none of it clearly. He only heard the word that mattered. Released. Emma burst forward, throwing her arms around him. Michael held her as tight as his trembling arms allowed, feeling her heartbeat hammering against his chest. "I miss so much," he whispered into her hair. "You're here now," she murmured back. "That's all that matters." When they stepped outside, a wall of reporters closed in, questions flying like bullets. But Michael didn't flinch. Sarah and Donovan flanked him, shields against the world. A reporter shouted, "Michael, what now? What does freedom mean to you?" Michael looked at the sky, gray but vast, endless compared to the steel and stone that once caged him. "Freedom," he said, voice clear over the clamor, "means telling the truth until they can't hide it anymore. It means living. It means not wasting a second more." He turned to Emma, smiling despite the tears in his eyes. "Let's go home." They walked away together, father and daughter, into a world that, at last, would have to see him for who he truly was. Innocent. Alive. Free.
If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. Thank you for watching.